Welcome back to Murder Minutes. Now let's kill some time. Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of Murder Minutes. It's Larry here, and today we will be discussing the chilling details of Bob Berdella's torture and killing spree. Bob Berdella was an American individual who gained attention for his actions in the 1980s. Although he led a seemingly ordinary life, his true nature shocked the public when it was revealed. His activities had a profound and disturbing impact on the community where he resided. Berdella's actions were known for their gruesome and sadistic nature. He engaged in a series of kidnappings, torture, sexual assault, and murder of young men. Berdella subjected his victims to prolonged periods of captivity, during which he would inflict severe physical and psychological abuse upon them. The details of his crimes included acts of torture, mutilation, and the documentation of his victims' suffering through photographs and notes. The extent and brutality of his actions earned him the moniker the Butcher of Kansas City and placed him among the most notorious serial killers in American history. Before Bob Berdella committed his heinous crimes, he had a relatively normal life. He was born on January 31, 1949 in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. Berdella was raised in a middle-class family and had a seemingly unremarkable childhood. He graduated from Revere High School in 1967 and later attended the Kansas City Art Institute. Berdella was known to be an active member of his community, involved in various local organizations and activities. He established his own shop called Bob's Bizarre Bazaar, which specialized in selling antiques, artifacts, and curiosities. Berdella was well regarded by his customers and appeared to lead a regular and law-abiding life. Behind this seemingly ordinary facade, Berdella harbored dark and sadistic desires that eventually led him down a path of extreme violence and depravity. The exact factors that contributed to his transformation from an apparently average individual to a serial killer remain the subject of speculation and analysis by experts. Bob Berdella is known to have had at least 6 victims. The exact number of his victims may never be known with certainty, as Berdella's crimes remained undiscovered until his arrest in 1988. The identified victims of Bob Berdella include Jerry Howell, Robert Sheldon, Mark Wallace, James Ferris, Todd Stoops, and Larry Pearson. These young men were subjected to prolonged periods of captivity, torture, sexual abuse, and ultimately tragic deaths at the hands of Berdella. It is important to acknowledge that there may be other potential victims who have not been identified or connected to Berdella due to the nature of his crimes and the length of time that has passed since the incidents occurred. Bob Berdella's first known crime involved his victim, Jerry Howell. Berdella had developed a friendship with Jerry before luring him to his home in Kansas City, Missouri in July 1984. Once inside, Berdella drugged Jerry with sedatives and immobilized him. Berdella subjected Jerry to a series of sadistic and torturous acts over an extended period. He physically and sexually assaulted him, inflicting severe pain and suffering. Berdella utilized various methods of torture, including electric shocks, suffocation, and prolonged periods of restraint. Throughout the ordeal, Berdella maintained control over Jerry through manipulation and psychological coercion. He documented his actions by taking photographs and keeping detailed notes, serving as a disturbing testament to his sadistic tendencies. Tragically, Jerry did not survive the brutal ordeal inflicted upon him by Berdella. His exact cause of death was not publicly disclosed, but it was evident that Berdella's actions led to his untimely demise. Bob Berdella's second known victim was Robert Sheldon. Berdella encountered Sheldon, a young man in his early 20s, at a local bar in Kansas City. He enticed Sheldon to accompany him to his home under false pretenses, where Berdella planned to carry out his sadistic desires. Once at his residence, Berdella drugged and immobilized Sheldon, just as he had done with his previous victims. He subjected Sheldon to a series of torturous acts, including physical and sexual abuse. Berdella's methods of torture included beatings, electric shocks, and forced injections of various substances. Sheldon endured prolonged periods of captivity in Berdella's house, where he experienced unimaginable pain and suffering. Berdella, similar to his other victims, took photographs and kept detailed records of his actions. Sadly, Robert Sheldon did not survive the ordeal inflicted upon him by Berdella. The exact circumstances and cause of his death were not publicly disclosed. Berdella's pattern of violence and the sadistic nature of his crimes ultimately resulted in the untimely demise of his victims. Bob Berdella employed various tools and methods in the execution of his crimes. Some of the items and techniques he used are as follows: Sedatives and drugs. Berdella used sedatives and drugs to incapacitate and control his victims. By administering substances such as tranquilizers or sedatives, he could render them helpless and compliant. Restraints. Berdella employed restraints to keep his victims confined and immobile. This included handcuffs, ropes, and other forms of physical restraints, preventing their escape or resistance. Instruments of torture. Berdella utilized a range of instruments and implements to inflict pain and suffering on his victims. These included items such as electrical cords, belts, whips, and even syringes for administering harmful substances. Electric shocks. Electrical shocks were one of the methods Berdella used to torture his victims. He would apply electrical current to their bodies, causing intense pain and distress. Suffocation and asphyxiation. Berdella would sometimes employ suffocation and asphyxiation techniques, such as placing plastic bags over his victims' heads or using ligatures to restrict their breathing. Injections. Berdella would inject his victims with various substances, including drugs or chemicals, which further weakened their ability to resist or escape. Photography and documentation. Berdella meticulously documented his crimes through photographs and detailed notes. These records served as a disturbing means of memorializing his sadistic acts and maintaining control over his victims. Christopher Bryson is known as the one victim who managed to escape from Bob Berdella's clutches, ultimately leading to Berdella's arrest and the exposure of his crimes. Bryson's exact background and personal details have not been widely publicized to protect his privacy and well-being. However, it is known that he was one of the victims targeted and subjected to prolonged captivity and torture by Berdella. In April 1988, after enduring weeks of unimaginable suffering, Bryson found an opportunity to escape from Berdella's house. He flagged down a police car and provided them with vital information about the location and identity of his captor. Bryson's bravery and quick thinking were instrumental in bringing Berdella's reign of terror to an end. His escape prompted the authorities to launch an investigation into Berdella's activities, leading to the discovery of substantial evidence and the subsequent arrest of Berdella. The courage and resilience demonstrated by Christopher Bryson in escaping from his captor helped shed light on the horrific crimes committed by Bob Berdella and played a crucial role in ensuring that justice was served for all the victims involved. When Bob Berdella was arrested, it marked the beginning of the legal process that would hold him accountable for his crimes. After the discovery of substantial evidence at his residence, Berdella was taken into custody by law enforcement. Following his arrest, Berdella was charged with multiple counts, including murder, sexual assault, torture, and other related offenses. The charges reflected the horrific nature of his crimes and the suffering he had inflicted upon his victims. Berdella was then subjected to the criminal justice system, where he faced trial for his actions. The legal proceedings allowed for the presentation of evidence, witness testimonies, and the opportunity for the victims' families to seek justice for their loved ones. During his trial, Bob Berdella did not testify or provide any formal statement explaining his actions or motives. He chose to remain silent and did not offer any personal account or justification for his crimes. The decision not to testify is not uncommon in criminal trials, and individuals accused of such heinous acts may choose to exercise their right to remain silent. Berdella's silence left his true motivations and the deeper reasons behind his actions open to speculation and interpretation. Instead of testifying, the evidence presented during the trial, including the photographs, diaries, and other documented materials found at his residence, provided a glimpse into the sadistic nature of his crimes and the extent of his depravity. The lack of a formal testimony from Berdella himself means that his specific motivations and inner workings remain largely unknown, leaving the public to grapple with the chilling reality of his actions without direct insight from the perpetrator. Ultimately, in 1989, Bob Berdella was found guilty on multiple counts and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The verdict ensured that he would spend the remainder of his life behind bars, unable to harm others. The arrest and subsequent legal process brought closure to the community that had been horrified by Berdella's crimes. It also provided some measure of justice for the victims and their families, although the scars left by Berdella's actions would never fully heal. After Bob Berdella was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, he was incarcerated at the Missouri State Penitentiary in Jefferson City. Life in prison meant that he would spend the remainder of his days behind bars, serving his sentence for the crimes he committed. While in prison, Berdella was kept under close supervision and security measures to ensure the safety of other inmates and staff. Given the nature of his crimes and his notoriety as the Butcher of Kansas City, He likely faced isolation and restrictions to prevent potential harm or retaliation from other prisoners. In prison, Berdella lived out the remainder of his life, largely removed from public view. He died on October 8, 1992, at the age of 43, reportedly due to a heart attack. His death marked the final chapter in a dark and disturbing saga, leaving behind a legacy of horror and tragedy. Thanks for listening to this episode of Murder Minutes. And a big shout out to our subscriber that requested this episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. If you have any stories or events of murders you would like us to cover, be sure to leave your requests in the comments section. Until next time, Murder Minutes out.